The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
There's a Jew, his name is Rabbi Joseph Talushkin, Joseph Talushkin. He's a famous author in the United States. He wrote many, many books. He wrote a book on Jewish humor and a book on Jewish literacy. We were once flying together to South Carolina on a conference by the Federation on Jewish continuity. So we flew together on a little airplane. So we were sitting near each other. So Joe Talushkin, Rabbi Yosef Talushkin, told me a story that happened with his father. It was a very, very moving story. Story is, his father's name was Reb Shlomo Talushkin. He had a Zayda. Some of you probably knew who Zayda was. He had a Zayda Reb Nissen Talushkin. Mr. Talushkin was a Rav in Borough Park. He wrote a sefer called Taras Mayim. He was a big expert on mikvayos. Reb Nissen Talushkin, Zechron Levrach. But he had a father, Reb Shlomo. Reb Shlomo was an Erlich Yid, a simple Erlich Yid, and he worked as an accountant. And he told me my father was one of these people who worked his entire life. You know, he never took anything from anybody. He woke up early in the morning, he davened, he put in a full day of work. He supported his family with simplicity, but with dignity as an accountant. One of his clients was the secretariat of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The secretariat of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was the accountant, the bookkeeping, the bills, whatever he did. He tells me in the mid-1980s, his father suffered a stroke. It was a serious stroke. And he was in the hospital. He lived in Brooklyn, in New York. He was in the hospital, a stroke victim. And it was devastating. You know, obviously he was just in the hospital. And he tells me, he gets a call. He gets a call from who? From one of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's secretaries, a Jew named Rabbi Yudel Krinsky. So sein gesund. Rabbi Krinsky tells him that the Lubavitcher Rebbe would look over the invoices at the end of the month. And he's looking over some of the invoices, and he tells Rabbi Krinsky, there's a discrepancy here. Yesh I hatamapa. There's a discrepancy between something is off. So Rabbi Krinsky says, he'll look into it. The Rebbe says, Bet Shlomo Talushkin, why don't you ask Shlomo Talushkin to check it out and maybe he can reconcile it for us. So Rabbi Krinsky calls Joe Talushkin and he says, I want to come over to the hospital to show it to your father. So Joe tells me, he says, Rabbi Jacobson, I told Rabbi Krinsky, didn't you tell the Rebbe that he's a stroke victim? He had a stroke? I don't understand. Are you going to go bother him in the hospital with some bill that you have? So Rebbe Yudel tells him, the Rebbe knows that he had a stroke. The Rebbe was notified right when he had the stroke. The Rebbe knows. So he said, so why didn't you tell the Rebbe? He says, listen, the Rebbe knows he had a stroke. The Rebbe asked me to go ask him. I'm not going to go ask the Rebbe, he had a stroke, you forgot? A chassid doesn't do that. So Joe tells me, he says, I felt very that he worked by the Rebbe's office for so many decades, and how could you forget he had a stroke? Rabbi Yudel said, listen, the Rebbe asked me to do this, let me do it. He said to come to the hospital. He said he comes to the hospital with the bills, and he gives it to the Shlomo Talushkin. The Shlomo Talushkin starts looking at it. And it wasn't a complicated thing, it was a very simple thing. And it was hard for him to speak. But his eyes light up and he says, I'll show you the mistake. And he caught the mistake and he reconciled the discrepancy and everything was wonderful. And Joe Talushkin tells me on the airplane, he says, you will not understand how much life that gave my father. Because he was feeling so useless. He was feeling like for the first time in his life, he's just makabel, he's just passive. The first time in his life, he felt so unneeded, so useless. You know, he worked every single day like he felt like he has to contribute to society. And for the first time, he was just debilitated, paralyzed. He said, I was upset at the Rebbe, and then I suddenly realized that the Rebbe could have figured out the discrepancy in a few moments, maybe a few seconds. And got a schneller cup to Lubavitcher Rebbe. He didn't want my father to help him with the bill. He wanted my father to know that he's needed. And he says, you should know that helped him so much come back to life. And he said he got back, he got out of it, and he continued to function. He continued to live for quite a few years. And when he told me this story, I understood something. There's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Deis Siman Reish Mem Ches, and it's in Rambam and Hilchas Matnas Aniyim Perek Zayin, that every Jew is obligated to give tzedakah. Afilu ani amisparnis min tzedakah chayev litin tzedakah mimashen noistem loy. Even a poor person who gets all of his money from tzedakah, he has to take part of the money that they give him for tzedakah. So you have to make sure to give him money that he should be able to give tzedakah. And I thought to myself, why? Why? I don't understand. Instead of having the poor man give tzedakah, take that money and give it directly to another poor man. No. When I give you tzedakah, I can only give you bread, and I can only give you cereal, and I can only give you water and milk and vegetables and potato. No. I also have to give you extra monies that you should give tzedakah. Why? The answer is because if a person doesn't give, the person feels less than human. We don't only give because I have, so let me give, I have extra. Giving is innate to the human spirit. It's innate to the human condition. A mensch darf sein am mashpia, nicht nur am makabel. A person innately needs to be a giver, not only a taker. So if you want to help a poor person, I can't just give you charity. I also have to give you the dignity that you should feel that you're giving something, you're not just taking. And therefore I have to give you extra money to be able to give tzedakah. Shlomo Telushkin was suffering that day. Not just physically, obviously, emotionally. He had to feel that he can give.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org